Good morning, you guys, and welcome back to Shepherding Pepper's Farm. If you're new to the channel, I'm Natasha, and today we are making dehydrated ground beef to put up in the pantry. So if you're anything like me, you worry about the idea of power going out and all of the meats and meals that you have in your freezer or refrigerator going bad. So we have things like dehydrated ground beef, dehydrated vegetables, dehydrated chicken that we can go ahead and we can put up in our pantry, and we don't have to worry about the idea of the power going out and us losing all of that food. That doesn't mean that we do not maximize our freezers as much as possible. We do a lot of freezer meals and cooking for meal prep type things on our channel. At the same time, I like there to be balance. So if you're anything like me and you are wondering how you go about dehydrating ground beef and storing it in the pantry, this video is for you. Step number one for me is to empty out anything that I already have in my dehydrator. There's a ton of fresh herbs coming in from the garden right now, and so I am doing a lot of dehydrating of teas, herbs, and spices. So I want to make sure that I get that out of there, and I put that up before I start working on the dehydrated ground beef. First step in dehydrating your ground beef is pretty crucial. You want to go ahead and pick ground beef that is not super high in fat content. Fat in dehydrated products is going to cause spoilage really quickly, whereas something that really doesn't have much fat in it is going to store much longer. It's not going to go rancid. It's easier to keep it in your pantry and not have to worry about using it by a certain date and having that spoilage affect everything. So for me, that means I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use something that is roughly a 90% lean meat to about a 10% fat ratio. If you can go ahead and find something that is leaner, you can definitely use that, because the leaner that it is, the less fat that there is, the longer it's going to go ahead and extend that shelf life, like I mentioned. And it ensures that you have a more pleasant flavor and texture in your final product that you're trying to store in your pantry. This is where my approach can differentiate slightly compared to some others. There will be some individuals out there who will tell you that you can take the raw meat and then you can go ahead and dehydrate it. If you do that, all of that fat content remains in your beef. Therefore, you do still have to worry about spoilage and using things by a certain date. Whereas I like to take it a step farther, and I like to cook my ground beef. I like to go ahead and cook the ground beef, not to the point that it is super well done and crispy and burnt or anything like that, but I like to cook it enough that I can go ahead and drain all of the excess fat and liquid from that ground beef before I go ahead and dehydrate it. This leads to your storage life being substantially longer. I have not once ever had ground beef that we have cooked before we've dehydrated it spoil, ever. So I 100% recommend that you do that. While it's cooking, you do want to make sure that you're breaking it up into smaller crumbles or chunks, pieces with a spoon, a spatula. It's going to help everything to be more uniform when it's drying, and that's important when you're dehydrating just about anything. You want to make sure that it's dehydrating in a very even, consistent manner. Typically for me, I will cook the ground beef in two different ways depending on what's going on. A lot of times when I am dehydrating things or getting ready to can things, I try to do a lot of different things at once. So my stove is often in use. This circumstance was a little bit different because I had some extra time and I decided to go ahead with this project of getting it dehydrated. But I also have a pressure cooker, and I will use the pressure cooker to cook ground beef. What's really interesting about the pressure cooker though is when it cooks the ground beef, it still looks pink. It doesn't have the same coloring to it that beef that's cooked on the stove, that's seared into crumbles, does. Now sometimes it can have a bit of browning on the outside of it as it cooks, but the inner portion of that ground beef, even though it's completely cooked, is going to be pink when you pull it out of the pressure cooker, which is pretty funny. It looks like it's kind of still raw and undercooked, but it's not. And I will run it through the food processor in chunks and blend it up. Now, anytime you run anything through the food processor, it's gonna make it into a much smaller crumble. So you do want to be prepared for that. For us, that type of ground beef is often used in taco meat. It's a lot like Taco Bell's ground beef, where it is very soft in texture and small, but I wanted to include both of those in this video for you guys. And as you can see, I'm just trying to break this up into crumbles, really, into little chunks of beef that you would typically use when you are cooking. And for this stock up, I did go ahead and just get those really huge rolls of ground beef that you can get from Sam's Club or Costco. And we are currently getting ready to do a whole other set of freezer meals, meal prep, things of that nature. So I wanted to go ahead and get anything out of my freezer that I have in there used and put up, ideally, if I can, in the pantry or transformed into ready to take out of the freezer meals. And we had a few of these really big rolls of ground beef in there. Typically, I will go to Sam's Club or Costco and I'll get a giant box of beef and a giant box of pork and a giant box of chicken. And then I will go ahead and put those in the freezer until I can get around to turning them into meals and things like that. And I have a ton of meatballs in the freezer. I have meatloaf and a bunch of other things, hamburger patties. So I was like, okay, it's time to ensure that I have some dehydrated ground beef put up in the pantry as well. So you can see over here, after I've gotten this cooked, I am going to strain this. I want to leave this in the strainer for a little while, enough for it to cool, mostly because if it's cooled, I can ensure that that beef isn't sitting saturated in fat, which is really important. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I don't want much fat, if any fat, involved in the dehydrated ground beef. I do not want to have to worry about there being spoilage or it turning rancid at all. I don't want to have to concern myself with that. So I'm going to let this sit in the strainer for at least 10 to 15 minutes until it's really started to cool down. So this is where I'm going to again differentiate our method of dehydrating ground beef from some other individuals' method, mostly just from experience. So I obviously do a lot of cooking. You guys are very much aware of that. And because of that, I had it in my head that I would season the ground beef the first time, dehydrated taco meat and dehydrated Italian beef and all of these things. And I thought this would just be a really great way to save time. Unfortunately, if you dehydrate ground beef with certain seasonings in it, it makes your entire house, if you have your dehydrator in your house, or your entire garage, because I keep the dehydrators, I have one in the garage and one in the house, because certain things just do not smell as great when you dehydrate them. And it will make your entire garage, if that's what you are using, smell like you are dehydrating cat food. I am not joking. It is terrible. All I did was add some Italian seasonings to the ground beef when it was cooking. It smelled so good in the house when it was on the stove and it was cooking. And then I went ahead and I drained the fat from the beef and I went and I put it on the trays, put it in the dehydrator, and everyone in my family was completely appalled by how much it smelled like wet cat food in the garage, to the point that my eldest teenage daughter was like, I'm not going to eat that. I don't care what you say. I don't care what it is. I'm not going to eat that. And eventually I was like, dude, it's fine. Calm down. Take a chill pill. And it was fine. It didn't taste weird or anything when we tried it later, but the smell was atrocious. Plus, I really like having the beef be unseasoned, so that way I can use it in any sort of dish that I want to. If I wanted to make a ground beef and broccoli teriyaki, I wouldn't have to worry about those Italian seasonings being in there and affecting everything. So my personal preference is not to use any sort of seasoning because, one, of the smell, and two, there's a lot more freedom with the ground beef. So here you can see we're putting these on dehydrator trays. I recommend you put them on a silicone mat. The upper right corner has this, it's kind of like a silicone mat. No, it's not. It's not really like a silicone mat. It's another type of mat that you put on top of the dehydrator tray. And you can't put ground beef, obviously, on the traditional trays because it'll just fall right through. And I don't like the white ones up in the corner because it still has little holes in them that will, if there's tiny pieces of beef, just drop right through. So I prefer to do this on silicone mats in the dehydrator. It doesn't stick. It's easy to wash. It's really great. That is a recommendation of mine. And I want to go ahead and layer the ground beef on there in a thin single layer because you want this to go ahead and dehydrate evenly. So you don't want to just pile all your ground beef on your silicone mats and have it be really excessive and bulky and heavy, because then you run the risk of, if it's humid, it getting mold on it in the process of dehydrating if you don't get to it immediately, or it'll just cook really unevenly, and then you'll have pieces that are super dehydrated and pieces that are not dehydrated at all. And if you try to store undehydrated beef, obviously, it's not going to work out super well. And so I did go ahead and load up the dehydrator as much as I possibly could. I'm going to fill up as many of these trays as I can because my goal is to fill up a 1 gallon size container of dehydrated beef. The ideal temperature for you to dehydrate your ground beef kind of falls in the range of 145 degrees Fahrenheit to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, or 63 degrees Celsius to 71 degrees Celsius. If you operate within this temperature range, it promotes a really efficient drying, but it also helps to preserve flavor and color and nutritional value of the beef, which is important because you don't want to lose anything when you're dehydrating it. You still want to make sure you're getting all of those benefits of having it the way you would want it in the first place. So once you get your dehydrator trays evenly layered with your ground beef, you want to go ahead and kick off that drying process by making sure that you are right in the ideal temperature range so it begins drawing out moisture immediately. As I already mentioned, we do have two different dehydrators. I have had two dehydrators for a very long time, and I have a history with one of those two dehydrators continually breaking on me to the point that I have had to replace it every 2 years. So currently I have one. It's a food mill. It's really good. My grandfather actually gifted it to me, I think a year and a half ago, and it's been doing really good. And then we have a second one that Seth just got us because we also dehydrate seeds for saving, and we grow all of our own teas and herbs and spices and things like that. So we're constantly using the dehydrator, and it just makes it more efficient having two. I will go ahead and link both of these in both this video and like in the actual video where you can click on it during the video, but also in our Amazon store, so you have that, and that'll be in the description of the video. I'll also make sure I put in there the silicone food tray liner thingies if you want to try those as well. I really recommend some sort of silicone lining though. Now when it comes to rehydrating your ground beef, you want to go ahead and submerge it in boiling water or broth, and then make sure the entirety of the meat is covered, and then let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes and see if it has softened up, if it has absorbed the liquid. You can also take it, and if it's in a microwave safe bowl, after you've added that water or broth into it and let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes, you can microwave it for a short period of time, and that'll help it all to just rehydrate. And then you have perfect ground beef, and it's done and it's ready, and you really don't have to do much, which makes meal preparation, it makes dinners where you're tired and you don't want to do much so much easier, because you could rehydrate it and throw some taco seasoning in there and it's just done. I absolutely love dehydrating and canning things because it just makes it so much easier. And if you're anything like me, I'm a mom. I've got kids that are constantly doing activities like dance and theater, and I'm working in the garden, and I have another job that I do, so I need to keep meals good and nutritional and healthy, but also time effective. Most of the time, by the end of the day, I'm pretty worn out, which is why I love the freezer meals or the dehydrated items so much, because I can still have these really wonderful, flavorful, nutritious meals on hand, and I don't have to do anything by the end of the day when I'm worn out, which is ideal. Let's talk about some troubleshooting tips or tricks or things that you can run into. Obviously, number one is if you season your ground beef, you do run the risk of some very interesting smells happening. So if you find that you are dehydrating your ground beef and it smells funky, I would, one, consider the fact that if you do not have any sort of seasonings in there and you have followed these steps, you have drained your meat from the fat after cooking it. It's probably just the fact that when you dehydrate ground beef, it has a smell. It doesn't smell great. I mean, you're dehydrating beef, but at the same time, it shouldn't smell awful. If it smells really, really terrible, there's probably fat in there that's trying to dehydrate, or you added seasonings. So keep that in mind. Number two, if you're finding that you are not having a lot of evenness in your dehydrating, you're taking it out, you're checking on it, and about halfway through you're finding that it's cooking really well on one side or not on the other, or it's cooking a lot on the top and not very much on the bottom of your tray, I would go ahead and stir it, kind of move it around on the tray, or swap it in your dehydrator. If it's facing one direction, put it in there another direction, or making sure that it is not overpacked on your dehydrator tray to make sure that you have airflow reaching all the trays evenly at the same time. So definitely while they're dehydrating, make sure you go in and check on it at least once about halfway through. A good starting point for assessing it is, 6 to 10 hours roughly if you're dehydrating it at 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So, about 3 hours in, try to go check on it. If you've done this frequently, you probably have an idea of how your dehydrator works and you might not need to check on it as much. But keeping that in mind, that you may need to check on it about halfway through. And if you hit the 6-hour mark and it's still not fully dehydrated, give it another 4 hours possibly. So I would recommend starting it in the morning if it's the very first time you've dehydrated ground beef, so that way you have all day to kind of work through any of the hiccups or the bumps that could come with doing a new project like this for the first time. Because for me, I'm that person who's going to run into all the hiccups and all the bumps. It's going to happen. So you want to just make sure you are at home, you can keep an eye on it the first time, and once you are familiar with the process, you don't really have to worry about it as much. Now I can go ahead and put it in the dehydrator, and I know exactly how long it's going to take to cook. I know how everything should smell. I'm prepared for all of the steps, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's important when you're doing things like this. When you're first getting into it, you just want to make sure that you are prepared for any sort of hiccup that you could have. Let's discuss how we go about storing this, how we package it, or if there's any sort of hidden secrets to it, which there's really not. You just want an airtight container. I prefer 1-gallon containers because when I'm going to go through this process, I want to make sure that I am doing enough so that my time and my effort going into this isn't just a short little amount of stuff that's cooked and dehydrated, and then I'm going to have to do the process over and over again. I want to just go ahead and bulk do it so that way I don't have to worry about it as much in the future. So for me, this includes a giant 1-gallon glass container. Some people will tell you that you should vacuum seal your ground beef. If you do not intend to get into it regularly, then that is always an option. You can vacuum seal it. You can use those Mylar bags and store it for an extraordinarily long time. Even though I don't do that, I do place an oxygen absorber in these containers. Now, Seth didn't do that this first go around, so I went back in later and put an oxygen absorber in there just because it helps everything to stay free of moisture and stuff like that. It's just really helpful to have one of those in there. But it's important that you're kind of storing it in an area that is cool, dry, dark. All of those things are ideal. I don't have any sort of basement food cellar situation, so I store this in my pantry. My pantry is in my laundry room. You'll see it at the end of this video when Seth goes and puts the container away. But for me, basically, this just means I'm going to put it in a 1-gallon container. It's glass. I know that most of the time the light isn't just on in the laundry room 24/7, so it's pretty much dry and dark in there. And it stores really well in there. I've never encountered a situation where I've had spoilage with it. And if it's done properly, you can maintain ground beef stored dehydrated for years. I don't know the exact amount of time. I think the sniffer is a pretty good test. If you smell something that's funny or off ever, don't eat it. Don't try that. If it smells weird, leave it alone. That is always my recommendation. But like I said, I haven't ever run into a situation where that's occurred for us. We've dehydrated it and then we've used it in the magic of meal prep so frequently. This is something that you can use in chilies, in tacos, in pasta sauces. You can take dehydrated ground beef camping with you if you like to camp or things like that. And it's very easy to rehydrate, as we already talked about. It's a very sustainable pantry version of putting ground beef up. And it's funny because before, when I was cooking the ground beef, when I was getting it ready to go into the dehydrator, the lights were off in the house minus the kitchen where I was filming. And that's because we were going through a massive heat wave at the time. And we had afternoons where there was just torrential downpours and thunderstorms, which is very common here in the Deep South. And the day after I filmed this and dehydrated it and we got this stored and put up, the power went out. I was actually filming another video during that time and we lost power in the house. And I was sitting there being like, I'm so thankful that I was able to dehydrate this and get this stored and put up when this occurred. I didn't lose any of the meat because of that. It was just really nice. And even though the power was out for hours and hours, I didn't have to worry about this because it was already good. It was already done. It was already in the pantry, which was really nice. All right, you guys, if you have any other questions about dehydrating ground beef, go ahead and drop those below in the comments section. If you have been dehydrating your own ground beef and you have any other tips or tricks that you want to go ahead and add to this, go ahead and drop that in the comment section below. I know sometimes it can take me a minute to getting around to responding to everybody. I do try really hard to respond in some way to the majority of the comments, but I love reading what you guys write. You guys have some of the best tips and tricks and feedback, so I value all of your opinions. And if you want to add anything to this, I always look forward to reading that, and I'm sure other people find it very helpful too. So on that note, I will see you guys in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you later. Bye, y'all.